So, hey everybody that came out to the Fireship, the Fireside Fellowship chat. We are joined today by Omer and Moises. They are going to be helping you guys learn how to translate your military experience into competitive applications for fellowships. So, as a quick intro, Moises is a U.S. Marine Corps infantry officer, a Pat Tillman scholar, and a dual MBA and MPA candidate at MIT Sloan and Harvard Kennedy School. He also has a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University. He's a Marquis Ventures Fellow working at the intersection of national security and venture capital. He is a Luna Cap Foundation Fellow supporting access to top-tier MBA programs and a Harvard Zuckerman and Management Leadership for Tomorrow Fellow. He's also the founder and president of Man's Legacy Foundation and serves on the advisory board of Talent's Reach Foundation, the continued focus on leadership, service, and impact beyond uniform. Omer is a former U.S. Marine Corps infantry officer and Pat Tillman scholar who currently serves as senior director at C3AI, partnering with U.S. and allied governments to apply artificial intelligence across defense, intelligence, and critical infrastructure. His prior experience includes serving as a senior advisor in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, a research fellow at Harvard's Belfer Center, a legislative fellow in the U.S. Senate, and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He holds a Master's of Public Administration from Harvard Kennedy School and a Master of Science in International Relations from Northeastern University. And to open it up, I had some quick questions for you guys. So Moises, many veterans struggle to translate their military experience into civilian language. How did you convert your infantry leadership experience into a clear value proposition for fellowships and other graduate programs? Awesome. Thank you. Omer, do you have any feedback on that? What's your opinion?
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly concur. And I think you have to be able to delineate between the institutional nuances of what made you great. Like in Mo and our case, we were infantry officers, and the rigidity of process management is what made us unique as infantry officers. I think all too often people fail to divorce themselves from what made them great at the institution that they used to be a part of, and then what the value proposition will be. So you can certainly distill process management and convert it into a value proposition, whether it's for graduate programs, technology, public policy, whatever it may be. But you can't necessarily just take those comparative advantages at face value and then try to amplify them. I think that's the only thing I would add, but I wholeheartedly concur with Mo. I think laying it all out and then kind of turning off your military blinders and looking at your accomplishments through a fresh perspective before translating them is a very good best practice.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much. And Omer, another question for you. From your experience across policy, technology, and government, what military skills do the selection committees consistently value, but veterans often fail to articulate clearly?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and a very excellent question given all the I call it the transition noise that's out there. I feel like and not to knock on retired E9s or retired O6s, but every career military officer that's retiring has a different flavor of advice right now out there, which sometimes I find ironic because this is their first time transitioning as well. So I take every bit of advice with a grain of salt, or at least that was my strategy. Something that I feel as though veterans over index on is this idea of leadership. Leadership is great, but again, the kind of institutional and formal authority that we had as military officers, NCOs, is far different than the kind of credibility that you have to advertise when you're entering the technology sphere, public policy, or the broader think tank ecosystem. So to me, having been on hiring committees and selection committees for fellowships, I think the most valued propositions that veterans can offer when they clean it up is judgment, ownership, and most importantly, learning velocity. If you even go look at the construct of what the GT score stands for, right? We don't look at the GT score of a soldier, Marine, airman, or sailor for the sake of determining intellectual aptitude, but we look at a GT score for the sake of determining how quickly they can learn new concepts. And if more veterans, without kind of airing out their GT score, can translate that concept to the civilian workforce and the broader academic and fellowship enterprise, I think that's great. Another thing that I've personally noticed, which worked for me and works for other successful candidates, is the ability to convey that we were in charge of not just assessing risk, but we were in charge of effectively mitigating it by implementing control measures that had to be fluid, right? So whether it's combat operations, you were at a range, or you were just dealing with a social deviant that happens to be in your formation, the ways in which you treat that human capital and the ways in which you implement all the right control measures are skills that, if conveyed appropriately, instantly put you outside the pack, regardless of what your performance was like in the military, whether you went to a service academy, where you went to school. So those are some of the skills that I would say amplify and amplify them repeatedly. And then lastly, if we're talking about the public policy realm, I would say the ability to write well and write fast, despite the emergence of ChatGPT, Claude, whatever it may be, an individual's ability to take what's happening at face value and then assign some degree of metrics to it and then write about it and push it out is something that I feel like military members do extremely well. We've done the sit reps, we've done the kind of ad hoc, hey, commander needs this, so we need it on the slide ASAP. Veterans often fail to convey that. So I would definitely recommend that. But yeah, go ahead, Jacob. I think you had a side question.
Sure. So the side question was actually related to something that you mentioned before about being in the infantry. And this could be a question for both of you, Moises and Omer. I've met plenty of infantrymen who would either put on their resume the extremes of saying served and I had over $10 million worth of equipment in my inventory when they were like in E2 or in E3. Then I have other people who said I did absolutely nothing at all in the infantry. I was just a part of a team. And they seem really humble. Where's the fine line? Because obviously the E3, E4 does not have $10 million worth of equipment. They're not really signed for that. Where's the fine line and how should people convey what they actually did?
Go ahead, Mo.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, wholeheartedly concur with that. I think the only thing I'd add is and I'll use an example. So Mo and I both were graduates of the basic school. That's the 6 months that all Marine officers go through before going through our occupational training. And a question that often used to come up, especially for prior enlisted officers, was, why don't we teach fitness reports, and why don't we teach the things that are really going to influence an enlisted Marine's career? And I remember at the time, the TBS commanding officer gave a response that really stuck with me because I was critical of the curriculum. And he said, we can't teach stuff that new lieutenants aren't even going to be able to conceptualize. So some things have to be learned later on. Now, I preface my response with that vignette because there are certain things that, like Mo mentioned, you're the custodian of $400 million worth of equipment if you're an LAR platoon commander, or if you're an armor officer or whatever it may be, right? Or an armor NCO. It's not the overarching aspect of the responsibility that I think we are able to distill and then convey and communicate in an interview. We have to take a step back and realize if we were stewards of that $400 million worth of equipment, what was happening behind the scenes to my earlier point of control measures, right? So if you were an NCO, what kind of control measures did you have in place so as to ensure that the integrity of that $400 million worth of equipment was kept intact? And we don't often think about it because we're never asked to, right? If you're in charge, you're told, hey, this is your account, maintain it, run with it. Um, to Mo's point of kind of laying it all out on paper, what I would ask folks that are dialed in is, when you're laying it all out, don't look at it from what you were expected to do with that information in the institution. Look at it on what are the value propositions of what you did to the hiring committee or to whatever, a fellowship committee, selection committee. And lastly, I'll say in that process of dealing with quantitative metrics is this uniqueness of planning, right? Everybody knows, like, Dwight Eisenhower once said, plans are worthless, but planning is everything. Again, really buzzwordy quote. You've probably heard a commander say that to you or some crusty general. But this aspect of planning being everything is something that's ingrained in us. And it's really not ingrained in a lot of our civilian counterparts. So to be able to convey that, hey, I consistently was either evaluating or assessing how to keep this account intact, those are the granular details that need to be conveyed instead of this broad stroke like, yeah, I was in charge of an armory that had $400 worth of equipment in there. And it's like, oh, well, cool. So giving it some more thought, and I think it all comes back to the excellent advice Mo gave is when you lay it all out, kind of take a step back, come back in and start to look at it, you're like, oh, wow, I actually did do a lot, but it was just an institutional expectation and everybody was doing their job. That's why nothing ever went wrong. So we need to evaluate what resulted in things never going wrong and then conveying those successes.
Okay, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And then how about for the people who were actually just E1 to E4 who definitely did not have that? What are some of the most valuable things that they can put in an application? I've met a lot of people who said, I've never deployed. I don't deserve to even apply to these schools, to these programs at all. They're going to say you were just an infantryman. What are some valuable things that they could take out of their experience and translate?
Go ahead, Mo. I'll follow your lead. Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is there's still something to be said. Earlier, I used the term, being a custodian of an armory or a large account. Whether you're coming from a private enlisted guy, I would argue there were times where I felt far more responsible for the results of a mission or for the results of like a mission statement, whatever that desired end state was, as a sergeant or a corporal than I ever did as a captain or a major, right? Because you get to distribute that responsibility in so many different ways. Whereas as an E1, E2, E3, I would argue the buck in many ways stops with you. So conveying that, and another analogy that came to mind was, Mo mentioned earlier, sometimes people get fixated on this idea of like, I have to talk about the unit that I was a part of because of the mainstream kind of sentiment surrounding it. So traditional, conventional folks will be like, oh, supported SOCOM mission during my deployment to Syria when they were a mechanic. It's like, you know what? I'm sure you fixed a piece of gear that then was involved in national level tasking, but a civilian panel doesn't care about that. I mean, sure, they've watched Lone Survivor. Maybe they questioned the plot. Maybe they were enthused by it. But to them, it's all one linear path, right? They respect everybody equally. I think we've created these internal silos where it's like, oh, yeah, that guy was Raider. That guy was a SEAL. That gal did this, special missions unit, blah, 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 right? And I just remember, I forget who this came from, so I'm going to recycle it, but I can't attribute it to the right person. But they said to me, if you were a wrench turner, I want you to tell me that you were the best goddamn wrench turner in that unit. I don't care what the unit was. Tell me what your job was and what your proficiency levels were, and then what your contributions resulted in, right? I don't want to hear name, unit, what deployment you were on. Again, most people don't even realize that we are still in Syria to this day. So I feel as though there's this internal divide and siloing within the veteran community that leads especially younger troops to be in this insecure bubble of, well, I wasn't with the teams or I didn't have a certain tab. I don't think I've ever met anybody that cares about any of that. Again, I go back to that piece of advice that I got where it was like, if you were a wrench turner, tell me how well you turned the wrench and what you did with it. And I think the same applies for the E1s, E3s, E5s is tell me what you did, tell me how well you did it. And if you can associate some metrics with it, do so. If you can't, wait till you get to the interview portion, convey who you were as a person, what the service taught you, and how, as a result of those two elements, you're going to be a force multiplier.
It's awesome. Thank you guys so much. So we have a lot of people submit questions ahead of time asking about the Tillman Foundation. So I'm just going to move on and do a little bit of questions about that. So Mo, how did you decide what belonged in your core story when you applied and what did not when you were applying for competitive fellowships like the Pat Tillman Foundation and some others? Thank you so much. And Omer, do you have any follow-up?
Yeah, I think one, I was totally a selection error. So I appreciate Mo's praise, but I am convinced that they either read the wrong application or they were like, you know what, let's go with this guy. We don't have enough Marines in this cohort. So I'm thankful for that. But along the lines of what Mo said, I want to add two things to that. One is I've been on the selection committee for the Tillman Scholarship for the past 2 years, and it is a lot of work, but for some reason it always happens at a period in my life where I'm already busy, but I love it because I get so energized by reading the stories of fellow veterans. And one, it's just so humbling because every year the cohort just like keeps getting better and better, and you're like, wow, I think I need to do slightly better. So that's energizing. So for those selfish reasons, I always volunteer for the committees. But something that I noticed with the most successful applications is successful applicants, to Mo's point, are already doing something impactful. But service in uniform is not the only like righteous or appealing aspect of their identity. These are genuinely good human beings who came to put on a uniform because they felt as though the goodness in their hearts and in their minds would be extended by wearing the uniform. And they know for a fact that, to Mo's point, they have the bias for action where they joined the military for all the right reasons, and now they want to be around like-minded individuals. So leading with mission and not these like very rigid milestones is what makes the best application. I am both proud and at times disappointed to deny applicants whose entire application is about, I was the best when I was in high school. That's why West Point took me. And then I might start naming some traits about applicants that through deductive reasoning, we might be able to figure out who they are. But, they will just go on a bragging session about, hey, I was the best at West Point, and then I went to Stanford Law. I was so good there that Stanford GSB took me, and now I want to fix climate change. And then you like Google them and you see that they're in defense tech venture, and you're like, okay, why didn't you just tell me that? And oh, by the way, I didn't want to hear how awesome you were because there literally isn't anything else about what your broader mission is, right? And the best mission statements are ones that don't start from the day that you put on the uniform. I think for most of us, like Mo has an identity of his own that started well before he put on his uniform. I have a story, and you don't have to convey your entire life story, but you have to very skillfully convey what elements of you as a human being, as a contributing member of society, made you unique when you were in uniform. And I have to throw it out there, uniqueness does not entail that you were in Syria or Afghanistan or Iraq. Like that era is gone. We're not going to have everybody that got a taste of combat, and that's okay. And something that internally within the Tillman Foundation during selection committees, during our briefs, we have made a deliberate effort to not have that combat arms bias or that GWAT bias. Sure, if you were a part of GWAT and you did amazing things, it's not going to be a discriminating factor. But this overarching idea of leading with a mission and not like career milestones is one thing I would add. And then the other thing I would add, and it's going to sound really, really close and familiar to Mo, with him currently being at the Kennedy School, is there's a professor by the name of Marshall Gans who helped President Obama early on, well, I should say Senator Obama at the time, craft his presidential narrative of how he was going to present himself. And he's a very prolific community organizer as well. And he teaches this class on storytelling where he conveys to his students that the most impactful narratives are ones that are rooted in this idea of story of self, story of us, and story of now. And it's almost, I call it a Joseph Campbell hero's journey on steroids, where when you're reading a narrative arc that's kind of got you on your toes. And again, you don't have to be a very talented writer to convey this, but taking those elements of who you are as a person, how that ties in to who you are today, and how those two elements then tie in with who we all are in this moment are probably one of the, and from a human behavior standpoint, if a story or an essay is written with those elements in place, you're hooked. You're not going to put it down. You're going to want to know more. And if it's like the fifth or sixth application that you're reading that day, it's right before or after lunch. An application like that just awakens you and it energizes you. So I convey that to every applicant that I talk to through service to schools, and other veteran ecosystems. So the Tillman Foundation, for one, isn't necessarily looking for that polished product, but they're certainly looking for an overarching mission. And that mission does not have to have started in uniform. It could have started well before uniform. I would argue those are the best missions, the ones where somebody was so hungry to lead, but they knew that it was going to take them a while elsewhere in the humanitarian sector or in the private sector or in the traditional nonprofit space to gain those skills. So they saw the uniform as like this raw opportunity to step in day one and start leading, but they knew they had to go back to that other mission. Those are the best essays. Those are the best narratives. And again, if you don't have that kind of a mission, convey another mission, but do not convey milestones because they just seem too rigid, too structured. And again, milestones can be part of your mission, but the mission has to be there.
Awesome, thank you. So another off-script question. What do you guys recommend for people who get out of the military and they're like, I don't know what I actually want to do. I'm very high achieving. I have the passion and I want to do something, but they're just all over the place and not connecting the dots. How do you figure out what your dream is or find out what you're passionate about? And if you want me to follow up with this question later on, so you guys can think that over, just let me know.
Jacob, if you find the answer to that, let me know because I'm in my mid 30s and I still change my mind every day. No, I think the best, Mo will attest to this because he and I have always talked about this. I don't think there's a better network out there than the veteran network, but I also don't think there's another demographic out there in America that is more shielded and tribal as the veteran network is. And it's all self inflicted, right? So, as the old adage goes, birds of a feather flock together. So, the soft guys kind of go on, they create their foundations and they want to be insular. The combat arms guys and gals kind of go off, they do their own thing. And that's encouraged, right? Sure, do it because, hey, shared experiences are a thing. But when it comes to almost cross pollinating these communities, when it comes to figuring out what a healthy nonlinear track looks like, what the day to day of private equity, venture capital, consulting, investment banking, nonprofit management, whatever it may be, you name an industry and there's a high functioning veteran that's already in it. But you name that individual, and I promise you, they're also willing to talk to you about it. But I think at times, Jacob, to your point, it's always the high functioning veterans that are so high functioning that they get in their own way. I share that because I was one of those guys. I don't think I was ever too high functioning, but I certainly left the service with an ego. And And it was a healthy ego because um they teach infantry officers in every branch of service, or I should say just infantry men and women or service members in general, right? We get taught that there is no hill that you cannot take. And that's good till you actually come up to a terrain feature and you're like, nope, definitely not taking this one. But it's good to kind of sprinkle that into your next life or your next journey. But sometimes that very mentality leads you to not want to reach out. So I would encourage anybody who's a little puzzled or confused about what's next to just go and explore your Rolodex. And if not yours, then like reach out to us, reach out to anybody. I am guilty of this. And my better half, she always tells me, like, you can't just respond to everybody that reaches out to you on LinkedIn, but I just feel guilty and I always respond. I might not respond right away. I respond 3 weeks later. I've had people, fellow veterans, like then get mad at me. They're like, "Why did you respond to me 3 weeks later?" I'm like, "I don't know, man, because I'm busy." Like, but always respond, and I love talking to people, even if it's for 15 minutes. And then if there's follow-on chats, and to Mo's point, we're former infantry officers. We love talking. We love an audience. We decided to do this for a living for a reason because we had egos. So yeah, long and drawn out way of encouraging people to do not be afraid of the unknown and reach out. Completely be afraid of the unknown without any information, and like don't go into a line of work without knowing much about it just because it's prestigious. Every veteran that's gone into consulting will tell you that. But yeah, have chats. Most people love sharing what works for them and what didn't. So please reach out. And then if a stranger is out of the bounds, then I would like to think this conversation is enough of an icebreaker for you guys to treat us not as strangers. And yeah, my better half, she will be mad at me for accepting more LinkedIn requests and talking to people, but it's all right. I'll always make time for fellow veterans. Over to you, Mo.
That sounds great. So guys, at 6:45, we were just going to take a quick break just so everybody could check on their kids, get water, do whatever they have to do. And we'll pick it right back up at 6:50. But really quick question while we wait. You guys both mentioned networking, and I've been told by a lot of veterans that they feel that networking is dirty or they hate it. They feel that it's transactional. What tips do you have for veterans so they can break out of that mindset and realize like you're not just helping yourself, you're also helping other people as well?
I can go real quick. So I'll tell you this. I network not for the sake of myself, but there is no greater feeling, to Mo's point, when somebody reaches out. Like for me, there is no greater feeling than saying, "Hey man, I don't have the answer, but I met this other dude or gal like 2 weeks ago at an event. Let me connect you guys." And I can fully attest to the fact that Mo is like a walking Rolodex and he does that all the time. I just texted him 2 days ago about an event, and I was like, "Hey man, are you plugged in with XYZ community?" And I wish I could like post a screenshot of what he wrote back. He was like, "Bro, dot dot dot. I'm plugged in everywhere." And I don't think he's plugged in there, and I'll let him shed some light on it. I don't think he's plugged in there for his own sake, right? I go to random IMF events in DC. I'm not an economist. I don't aspire to be one, but there is no greater feeling than even non-veterans in my network that when they reach out to me and they say, "Hey, do you know somebody at the World Bank?" And I say, "Yeah, man, give me 2 seconds. Just met this person. I've got their business card laying around somewhere." So I get it. The initial hunch of networking when you're coming from an ecosystem where everything's kind of so rigid, right? Like you wear your resume on your left breast pocket. So if that isn't working out, then you run really fast or shoot really well. So we use different currencies in uniform to get ahead, but in a way, that's still networking. You found a variable and you're bolstering that variable for the sake of maneuverability, right? I treat networking in that same realm, right? But I never end any networking chat without a, "Hey, if you feel like you need something, reach out to me." But I always tell people, go to my LinkedIn. And if we have connections that are either mutual or there's somebody on my network that could benefit you, please reach out. And 9 out of 10 times, you're going to have people that take you up on it. You'll be the catalyst for that connective tissue. You'll move on. And then, as fate would have it, 3 or 4 weeks later, somebody else is going to reach out and say, "Hey, man, I was hoping you could connect me to this individual at OpenAI." And you're like, "Actually, wait, I just helped them out 3 weeks ago." So again, you end up serving as this conduit. And I just think it's almost like volunteer work. When you do it, you just feel great. So sure, somebody might say that's selfish and you're seeking instant gratification. But I'm sorry, like find me somebody that just does things out of the kindness of their heart without some altruistic or idealistic sentiment behind it, right? So yeah, I would again, it's an iterative process. It takes a little bit. It's like working out a new muscle. The first time you work out, you're like, "Damn, I didn't even know that existed in my back." Like, never doing those rows again. But then you're like, "You know what? I'm going to keep doing it," and you just get better at it. So over to you, Mo.
Omer, this question has to do with something that you mentioned earlier about a nonlinear career. So you've worked across think tanks, the Pentagon, and many different industries. How should applicants frame their careers if they're nonlinear so that they appear intentional and rather than scattered?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I think one, I would say, if you talk to very successful principals, whether it's in national security, politics, traditional public policy roles, or even the private sector, the one common thread that they all have is that they were willing to take the leap. So the best way I present my non-linear track is I frame it as me being somebody who's willing to assume a lot of risk, not to get into my own career in uniform, but some of the things that I did in uniform had a lot of risk associated with it, but yet I was willing to assume it. And for anybody that's ever served under a boss who's willing to be less rigid and assume risk while still confining within the control measures that are set in place by an otherwise rigid institution, which largely the military and public policy circles are. I think that's admired no matter where you go. Even other principals who then see that you're willing to assume that risk just naturally respect you. So I never present my nonlinear track as chasing dragons, for lack of better terms. I present it with an underlying theme, and the underlying theme almost always is rooted in purpose. So when I first left the service and went back to grad school, from there, I went back into public policy as a political appointee in the previous administration. That wasn't rooted in ambition for me. It was very much rooted in purpose. I felt as though there were a couple of policy ideas and policy tectonic shifts that were happening. I happened to possess the expertise. I felt as though if I was there, I would make the most impact. And then when that was over, I came back to the private sector. And again, I didn't come back because of stability or money. Sure, those are variables that come into play, but the overarching reason was, again, that was the Overton window for impact. I felt as though my personality matched with that impact, but most importantly, it was almost like the Swiss cheese model of like vision, impact, and opportunity. So for others that are considering it, one, I would say it's a scary feeling initially to want to take the leap because we come from a generation where if you're in your late 20s, mid 30s, the generation above us was one that believed in loyalty. They said, go to an organization, spend 20 to 30 years there, doesn't matter how they treat you, then you move on. But now, the question that I ask, being in big tech now, is what makes you think the institutions are going to reciprocate that degree of loyalty, right? We see it repeatedly with mass layoffs. So I'm not suggesting that people just assume risk blindly and kind of just go all over the place. There has to be some connective tissue between your overarching narrative and kind of your vision. But I would urge people not to be wedded to this idea of I have to stay in a certain industry for the sake of just like rising to the top. Non-linear paths, in my opinion, are the new future. And sure, there are some people that are going to raise their eyebrows. But if you can convey those three elements to them eloquently, most senior leaders that I interact with are extremely receptive to it. As a matter of fact, they passively admire it because they come from the school of thought where they were pitted to one industry and they decided to just stay. So they know how suffocating that can.
Thank you so much. Mo, do you have any feedback for that? He does a pretty good job at everything, doesn't he? Yeah. So
It's ChatGPT, man.
nice. It's pretty advanced. So Mo, quick question for you. So you participated in leadership fellows such as Zuckerman and Management Leadership Corps tomorrow. How did those programs shape how you present your leadership story today? That's a really good point. I do have two questions in the chat. The first question is, for scholarships like the Tillman, how did you tailor your application to the specific scholarship's values? Anybody want to take?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I would say don't over-index on playing to an audience because to Mo's point, there are 600 plus Tillman scholars and a lot of us volunteer for the first and second round application reviews. And there's a rubric that the foundation gives us, but then we have a strong sense individually of what values kind of we're looking for, right? And you can't over index on just the audience because you don't know what the selection committee is going to be comprised of. So the best course of action almost always is to be authentic. And if you're being authentic, not just about your service, but what came before it and what could come after it, I've gone through like 70 plus essays over the past 2 years. There is nothing more refreshing than a very authentic essay that's not trying to come off as if they were a war hero. They're like, hey, here's what I was entrusted with. Here's how I delivered and here's my vision, here's my overarching mission, here's how these two things combine. That's honestly the best way to do it. And again, to Mo's point, you don't have to try to dial in with like, oh, service, service. It's going to mesh well with the organization's guiding values.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then there's another question in the chat that asks, how is humor viewed for these applications? Should the essay have a lot, a little, or none at all? While one of my favorite C stories that I plan to write about is very funny by itself, should applications working with these kind of stories tone it down or turn it up for a chuckle?
I learn something new about Mo every time I interact with him. I didn't know he played the guitar. This is great. Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is I completely agree with Mo. If your most authentic self is going to be conveyed by some semblance or degree of humor, followed by you conveying your mission, do it. If that's the risk you're willing to assume, just know that there is risk in it. I don't know if you were referring to the Tillman Foundation or maybe a graduate program, but I couldn't agree more with Mo. One, because we all know this even from our day-to-day interactions. Written communication has such a high propensity to be misinterpreted. There are things that I communicate to my significant other that at times have to be clarified with either a voice note or a phone call, right? Now, imagine that being amplified in an essay. So, from a tone standpoint, unless you're an extremely gifted writer that can just like take the reader to what you're trying to convey, I would tread carefully. But and I, for one, know the power of self deprecating humor. I think anybody that has served knows the power of self deprecating humor when it comes to treating for shock or any of the tense situations that you want to pull somebody out of, right? But absent the ability to convey tone on an essay, I agree. There's like 500 words, 250, 350, whatever, depending on the essay that you're writing. Maybe save that for the face-to-face interaction because it is extremely powerful. And most importantly, if it's for like an MBA interview or something, highly encourage it because it humanizes you. There are a lot of rigid veterans that apply to these. And I don't fault them because the rigidity was your most prized value proposition with maybe a rigid boss who saw himself or herself in you. So they were like, good, promote ahead of peers. But that rigidity doesn't work well, especially in elite programs where you got to be able to get along with your cohort. And if you're presenting yourself to be like this very rigid, stoic individual in an interview, likely not going to work out too well, regardless of your scores and or your essays. So yeah, humor's great. Maybe just got to pick and choose where and how you convey.
Awesome. Thank you. So, Omer, another quick question. At the Belfer Center and the Atlantic Council, how do institutions like these evaluate whether somebody can move from ideas to real world impact?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think for one, I think more veterans, especially given the exposure that we've had in the past 20 years of what I, in a very nonpartisan manner, call forever wars. The barrier that usually exists with veterans wanting to enter these ecosystems is that most of us are disenchanted by the idea of entering another bureaucracy and or learning how to navigate another bureaucracy. But what people seldom underestimate is the role that think tanks play in shaping public policy. So I think for those reasons, I, in my own personal time, try to encourage as many veterans as I can who have good, groundbreaking, and disruptive ideas to come into the think tank ecosystem. The beauty of the think tank ecosystem, both with Belfer and the Atlantic Council, the two that you mentioned, is that you don't have to affiliate full time. You can be a non-resident fellow and then just use it as this fertile ground of ideas where you can keep one foot in the policy realm, whereas you're doing other things. In my case, the private sector, being involved in different funds, whatever kind of helps me align my my kind of desire to do good and whatever kind of quenches my thirst to want to learn something new, right? That said, what these ecosystems most value is people who can take ideas and then not operationalize them because that's not a think tank anymore, right? You have to be able to take ideas but operationalize coalitions that will then influence the implementation. What I mean by that is how well does a person like me, who's a veteran, has served in the private sector, but has also served at some pretty decent echelons in public policy, how can I leverage all of my networks to take a pre-existing idea and then inject it into these different ecosystems for it to be implemented? Because when it comes to key performance indicators or measures of effectiveness or measures of performance for a think tank, it's not what they're able to do internally, it's what they're able to do, produce, and then what gets implemented, right? So it's not just ideas, it's personalities that think tanks really go after because those good personalities who, again, network effectively, can build social capital and political cachet in different ecosystems, are the ones that are going to take these ideas and then get them implemented. Now, again, there's this glide slope where in the middle, if you cross a certain threshold, now you're a lobbyist. So nobody's asking you to be a lobbyist where you're taking these ideas and then peddling them in the halls of Congress or the Eisenhower Building, National Security Council, White House, whatever. No, you're in essence an operator that can speak eloquently to how these ideas are forming. You should certainly be able to contribute to those ideas. But most importantly, you should be able to build informal coalitions where you're then going to take these ideas and then just kind of help put them out there, right? Whether it's through having an effective online presence or just being a good personality that's well trusted. In my case, well trusted in national security circles, where I can just go say, hey, I've got this new report that the Atlantic Council is about to push out. Take a look at it. Let me know your thoughts. That's it. I haven't asked them to do much. In the process of them taking a deep look at it, because that individual and I just have a good, mutually beneficial working relationship, they're going to be like, wait, I actually happen to have a role in government where I can implement some of this. That is the crux of what moves the envelope forward in the think tank ecosystem. So, one, I would encourage veterans because most veterans don't realize it, but everything that I described, they're already good at. I'm sure Mo can relate to this. How many times have you had to do a very risky schema maneuver at a range or during a real life op where your boss is like, no, somebody's going to shoot somebody? And you're like, no, boss, I'm telling you, I've gotten everybody. My troops are prepared. We've mitigated the risk by being at this for the past 10 days. Let me do it. But you don't say that. Instead, you show them your performance evaluation checklists, you show them your operation risk management sheet, but above all, you're buying social capital. You're building a relationship with your boss, increasing their trust in you so that they let you do what you want to do. So, in many ways, most veterans are very effective lobbyists. They've lobbied for themselves on leave chips. They've lobbied themselves to go outside the liberty bounds. If you had a Marine Corps ball in Vegas, they're certainly lobbied you as their boss or as their NCO to let them go out in town past 3 o'clock in the morning, right? It's no different. You just have to be able to take it now, be comfortable in this new system, and then just navigate it well. So, all that said, that's what's worked for me. That's what I see work well for other veterans. But ultimately, it comes down to being an operator on behalf of these ecosystems and coming back to the idea of networking in the process of operating. All you're doing is you're not just helping that think tank, you're helping your own network for the sake of then helping others who reach out to you.
Thank you so much. Mo, do you have any thoughts? A good thing you're here. And Mo, another question. What is the hardest part of the Tillman application process to get right? How did you personally overcome it? I know you mentioned it took you 3 times to get in, so I can't ask Omer because he did it on the ref.
There's a lot of them, man.
Yeah, I
A lot of big
imagine.
words. So a follow-on question is, what is one concrete action that veterans can take this month to materially improve their competitiveness for fellowships like the Tillman Foundation?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is definitely start writing early, but then step away from your writing as well. I think I don't everybody's different, but I feel for me there's a gift in writing. It's very therapeutic where you get to put some raw thoughts on paper. But if you keep looking at it every day, it's almost like a confirmation bias of cognitively you just become fixated on shaping the circumstances around the application while being wedded to the initial narrative that you put on paper, right? Don't be afraid to pursue a certain narrative, step away, and then come back to it and say, hey, you know what? This doesn't look good. And then rely on both people that were part of that narrative and then people that were outside of it. As the old adage goes, the worst part of a war story is an eyewitness, right? Because they very quickly dilute your war story and they're like, nah, bro, that's not how it happened. And you're like, no, 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 I swear that's how I felt. And they're like, yeah, man, you might have felt that way. That's not how I saw it. Those people are great. You need them in your life. Equally as important are the people that weren't there with you on whatever story that is that you're trying to convey, whether it's a military related, a familial struggle that you had to overcome. Rely on people. This is, people say it takes a village. I think it takes a village to not just raise children, but it takes a village to get ahead in life. And if you come from humble beginnings, which I think most of us on this call, the reason we're relying on each other is because we don't come from the cookie cutter families where mommy and daddy are going to help us with these applications, right? So that said, it does truly take a village. And I would argue to Mo's earlier point, we belong to one of the strongest villages there is, and not just this nation, but across the globe. We have amazing people in this village. Rely on them, have them take a look at it. Do not be afraid to change your narrative, no matter how wedded you are to it, because if you're getting advice, it's likely good. But I know this is going to contradict what I just said, but also don't be afraid to at times stick with your conviction. If people tell you to change it, ask them if there's ways that you can refine it. Because sometimes, ducks pick ducks. So people have a propensity to give you the blueprint that worked for them. And I've always hated that. People will be like, no, 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 craft your essay this way because that's how I crafted mine. I'm like, well, that's great. But you and I come from total polar opposite backgrounds. So there's a lot of nuances around it. There's a lot of kind of welding where you don't want to bend too soon and break the narrative, but you also want to nurture it in a way where it turns out to be the shape that is going to be most representative of who you are, not again trying to shape it in a way that's going to be most well received by the admissions committee or the selection committee. But it's going to take a lot of folks, and please don't be afraid to reach out and touch a lot of different folks to come up with a compelling narrative. Because again, people are willing to help. I and Mo, for one, are certainly folks that are willing to look it over, and as I'm sure are the rest of the folks. And couldn't agree more about like getting your name out there in a good and genuine way, because when you reach out to people in a genuine manner, most people are like, wow, this person's really dedicated. They want to get better at it. And I'll give a shout out to Jeff, who's still on the call here. Jeff and I would argue, thanks to Service to Schools, have built an amazing friendship because of the back and forth we've had on his essays. And I am in awe of how humble he was being, despite being a very high performing, badass EOD tech in the Army. His essays initially read he was conveying more humility than he was his individual accomplishments. And we went back and forth. There was a lot of pushback, and you guys ought to read his essays now because they are absolutely amazing. And I had nothing to do with it. It was just him. He had to come out and kind of own up to the amazing things that he had done. So, yeah, definitely a lot of breathing room, move around, but don't be fixated with the first draft. Iterate, deliberate, iterate some more before you hit submit.
Also, been hear about Jeff's essay. Jeff, you got to send it over to me so I can take a look at it. Tell you if it's good enough, even though I got rejected already. So, just for some closing questions, because we have about 6 minutes left for both of you guys. If you had to distill this entire conversation into one guiding principle for applicants applying to either a fellowship, a graduate school, or looking for their next career, what would it be?
No, that's excellent advice. And I think on that note, I'll share a piece of advice that was given to me a long time ago by a mentee. And this is when I was a young lieutenant and I had just transitioned after being a sergeant. And it was always interesting because you question yourself and you say, hey, what would I have to offer to mentees as like this brand new lieutenant? And over time, I realized the power of deliberately mentoring people was that they likely will have other mentors who are far ahead in their lives, and they will give your mentees advice that will then end up recycling back to you. And this was a Marine who was in my reserve unit who wanted to go to med school kind of in his late 20s. And he befriended a very well-renowned teaching physician who told him, follow the compass, not the clock. And it's interesting because at the time that this mentee gave me this advice was when I was commissioning, and I was between like commissioning or going to law school, but then I realized you're only 25 once in your life. And I don't think I would have been pleased. 50-year-old me would not have been pleased had I have went to law school in my early 20s and not become an infantry officer. So I kind of took that advice to heart and I was like, okay, right now the compass is stating you got to be a grunt. I'm going to go do it. And now in my mid 30s, I am strongly considering going back to law school as a result of this advice of following the compass, not the clock. I share that because, to Mo's point of people kind of being ahead or maybe a little bit behind, us veterans have this propensity to take quantitative measures and then compare them. So we say, oh, I'm in my mid 30s. I could have been a lieutenant colonel if I was still on active duty, but now that I'm out, if I go to consulting, it'll take me 6 years to become partner. But if I go to a law firm, then it's going to take me four. That's all noise. Get rid of it. Recognize what your potential is and where your value proposition is going to be. And again, as corny as it sounds, follow the compass and do not be overly fixated on the clock aspect of it, because 10 times out of 10 it's just going to be a detriment to your success. You're going to get in your own head. Another thing with regard to fellowships is do not read people's bios and then compare their careers with yours, because the bios are extremely manufactured, right? The bios don't come till after selection. The bios have no semblance of what was in your essays. So you could see a very neatly, well curated, and polished bio, and you're going to be like, oh, great. This guy was an ODA commander. This gal was in a special mission unit. Like, she supported Dev Group. Who am I? You don't know if they even talked about that in their essays. And 10 out of 10 times, most of those people are so humble that they didn't talk about it in their essays. Their essays were very much, hey, here's my mission, here's how committed I am to it, and here's how I'm going to achieve it. So I've had a lot of folks that have reached out to me about this. I call it biopolitics, where they'll be like, yeah, man, I don't know why I didn't get selected because I read this bio and that person, like, excuse my language here, but they're like, they ain't shit. And it's like, okay, man, like, please don't do that. Right. So do not be overly fixated on what the public persona of somebody is. If you're really curious about their career, reach out to them, talk to them about it, and they'll usually be very honest. I have sent my essays to people when they say, hey, what was your narrative arc? I'm like, hey, you know what? I'll spare you the conversation. We can talk about it, but here's my essays, right? So dig a little bit deeper on what I call the half truth principle, because people's public identities are usually very curated, mine included, because most of us belong to ecosystems where the moment we go in for a certain meeting, instantly somebody's Googling us, right? So don't be overly fixated. And then the second thing is, for both grad schools, future employment, fellowships, think tanks, political appointments, whatever it may be, make it easy for the person on the other end to bet on you. Because at the end of the day, that's literally what this is, right? The Mo can attest to this, like the Tillman Scholarship, they receive thousands and thousands of essays and thousands of applications. Even I was a next generation fellow at the Center for New American Security, which will be announced here soon. Mo is part of this year's cohort, and I'm very proud that I get to share another ecosystem with him. That is a fellowship where you receive like anywhere from 6 to 10,000 applications, and 25 people are selected. So yes, it's merit based, but a lot of it is, at the end of the day, it comes down to a set of human beings on one end of the panel willing to bet on one human being on the other end. So to Mo's earlier point, you have a finite amount of resources and a finite foundation to present who you are. And you just have to make it easy for the other person to bet on you. And that's difficult because, again, we come from an ecosystem where there's ribbons, there's badges, and there's your master brief sheet, DD 214. So a lot of that work has been done for you institutionally. Here we are in this new ecosystem where you have to do that work now. And that's okay. That's the essence of selling yourself. And the last thing I'll say on that is, the better you are in humbly selling yourself, the better the institution is willing to bet on you, because guess what you're going to do next? If you succeed after getting selected in these fellowships, you are doing that institution's work for them. You are doing their bidding for them for free by just being a good human being and contributing to society and amplifying what their vision was. That's in essence, in many ways, how the Pat Tillman Foundation survives, right? Is yes, people know about Pat Tillman, they're extremely moved by it, and they donate a lot of money to the foundation for those reasons. That's 50%. The other 50% of their fundraising efforts are as a result of what Pat Tillman Fellows do out in the real world. So that's what the equation has to come down to is how can I make it easy for this organization and this selection committee to bet on me? And equally as importantly, how will I be an extension of this organization's values so we continue on this journey of helping each other out?
But thank you guys for doing this. This was awesome. I really appreciate it, and the whole service and school team really appreciates it. Thank you so much again, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you for having us,
Thanks.
man. Thank you for all the work that you guys do.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank
seriously.
you. Yeah, I'll see you guys.